I am glad, number one, that I'm on a panel with two folks that are like incredibly talented and gifted and can do most of the talking. I did have a concussion a few weeks ago, so if I start speaking in tongues, call 911. Look, as you know, I have been in Mississippi a long time, and when I got the job here, I've lived in San Diego, California, and for those of you who've been to San Diego, you're probably thinking, why did you move? It's very nice weather, very kind of like what we have right now, but my boss gave me Willie Morris's North Toward Home. And she said, if you can ever catch the sense of place that's in this book, then you will have succeeded in Mississippi. And I'm still trying, but that is our superpower, sense of place and storytelling. A couple weeks ago, I had the honor and the pleasure of being able to speak up in Oxford at the conference on the porch. And on the speaking dais with me, I guess would say the list, was John T. Edge and Robert Davis. And for those of you who don't know Robert, he inherited 80 acres of scrub sand in Florida and turned it into Seaside and developed that. The guy's a rock star and really started a whole movement and development. And he was talking a lot about the importance of the front porch and of community. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is the importance of creating that community. Now, the front porch now is, if we can hold it up, we can hold up our phones, right? That's the community that we have. But a startup community is roughly defined as a network of people and institutions that add value to each other and help each other succeed, and that truly is what we do here in Mississippi. So I'm really glad to have both of y'all here today to talk about it, and I've got my little list of questions, and we're going to have the conversation. But feel free to go back and forth with each other and talk. We're just going to have that fireside chat, thank God, without a fire. That would be terrible, be horrible, because we have no place for a fireplace. All right, let's talk a little bit about the foundations of a startup community and what conditions need to be in place to have that start.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. Very honored to be here and to be part of this conversation. So I've been working in New Orleans for the better part of the last 15 years to build a vibrant startup community across our city and across our community. And we've been fortunate over the last year and a half to really have some big wins come out of that. So the accelerator program that I run has had 5 alumni that have exited in the last year for over $1.7 billion. And that is starting to build a flywheel effect across our community that is extending out beyond New Orleans, which we're super excited about. And so we spend a lot of time talking about what a startup community is. Because that is a real opportunity, I think, to create economic vitality and to create opportunity and new wealth creation and new civic leadership. And it really comes down to the connections that are in this room and the connections that we make across our communities. So it's not a place, it's not a building, it's a group of people, and it's a group of people that are connected with a common mission and a common purpose. Go ahead.
Okay, and I'll just echo John's thoughts there. And again, thanks for having me as well. It's been great to learn about what's happening in this ecosystem and how you're beginning to build certain aspects of the startup ecosystem. Others are growing, scaling, et cetera. So I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I have the pleasure of representing Microsoft in a partnership with the Green Bay Packers. Don't know if we have any Packers fans in the audience. Oh, I see one. Well, that's one more than I thought I might have found. The Packers were described once as the most improbable team in sports. Green Bay is a town of 105,000 people, not too much different than a lot of communities around this area. And they're also the only community-owned professional sports team in the U.S. So we don't have a billionaire owner. It's owned by the people. And so when we formed this partnership with the Packers, we wanted to leverage that community aspect where they're giving back to their own community as a sports team. But we wanted to create an economic development lens to that. How do we create businesses? How do we create scalable ventures in Green Bay, in the Midwest, and reach beyond, frankly? And so looking at the same types of things, how do you find the right people to bring together? How do you create the right physical place? We do have a beautiful building across the street from Lambeau Field, and having a great place that people want to come to does help. But then having all those resources connected in has been crucial.
Yeah, John and I were talking about that a little bit before the luncheon, a little bit about how, since the pandemic, we've come out of it, and we've learned a lot of things. Obviously, there's so much focus on the negative, but a lot of positives have come out. We've changed the way we work. We've changed the way our communities have been. We realize the importance of having those connections and so forth. Talk about that a little bit, how important it is to make those connections and to have that for whenever you're doing a startup and whenever you're starting a business.
Sure, I'll take this one first. So Titletown Tech, the venture that we formed with the Packers, is pretty unique in the venture capital space in that we have all corporate LPs. So LPs, the investors in a fund, most have many institutional funds, many angel funders. We have all corporates. And that was very intentional on how we were building our ecosystem because we have 150 years of experience in Green Bay building things, a lot of industry, a lot of healthcare innovation that we wanted to be able to tap into. And so being able to foster those connections into our local corporate muscle, but then add the tech lens to it with new innovations, new startups, created this unique, some would say one of a kind kind of setup with the broad base of corporations that we have.
Yeah, we think a lot about how the intersection of customers, capital, talent, and access to interesting problems creates opportunities for our entrepreneurs and our founders. And so if we can get the mix of those three things right, or four things right, that opens up new opportunities for new companies to come in, new things to be built, and really is a way to bring everybody to the table.
As an editorial cartoonist, one thing about Mississippi, I've had lots of access to interesting problems. So it's worked out really, really well. You talk about the strong sense of place. How does that help? For a community, like for instance, New Orleans, Green Bay, you both are very iconic places and so forth. But how important is that sense of place for developing, recruiting investors and so forth?
For us, I think it's everything.
Yeah.
To have 25 startups that we've invested in so far, we had to look at over 4,500 companies. Yeah. And not that the rest of those companies were bad companies, they just weren't good fits for what we're building, for how we're investing. But to have such a large funnel, you have to have a reason for people to either seek you out or be connected with you in the network. And having that place, that gathering place, that connecting point really has been key to unlocking all of that.
Yeah, the future is really about authenticity, right? Yeah. People want to live somewhere where they feel connected, where they feel a sense of purpose. And so places that can exude authenticity, and I like to count New Orleans in that number, are places where people want to gravitate. Mm-hmm. If you can give them the tools to not have to sacrifice economic opportunity to make that choice, they're going to make that choice in increasing numbers. And so, the story in New Orleans really started 20 plus years ago, connecting both people locally, but also folks that had a connection to New Orleans. They grew up there. They went to one of our universities. They came and had some sort of indelible experience. And they then wanted to engage and give back. And so that became the sort of core of the network that then was able to rally around the early phases of the startup companies that have turned into these incredible outcomes and incredible exits in the last year. And so, when people really love a place, they're motivated to make it better, and that's a core aspect of building.
And I would echo that too. And my own personal journey, I grew up in Southeast Wisconsin, and I'm a boomeranger. I spent about 7 years out in Seattle working for Microsoft. Figured I'd always have to quit that job and move on to something else, probably lower paying or more boring, to get back to the Midwest, frankly. But it's great to know that we've been able to create opportunities for people to move back to where they truly want to live. I was like telling the story of, does anyone know why Microsoft is in Seattle? Seattle wasn't this burgeoning tech center back in 1980, but Bill Gates and Paul Allen wanted to move home. So they moved home and they built Microsoft at home because they wanted to build up their own hometown. And then Jeff Bezos moved to Seattle, not because he had any personal connection, but because he wanted to poach employees from Microsoft. It's a true story. But it shows, and now Seattle is, this huge tech center with tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of tech-oriented employees. And so it just takes people that want to build at home to have the opportunity to come back home and build their business.
So Brad Feld is the sort of godfather of the idea behind startup communities. He's one of the founders of Techstars. He was from a place called Boulder in Colorado that is a great place to live, but didn't have a ton going on when Techstars was started there. And he's written a playbook about how to build a startup community. And one of the core ideas in that playbook is what he calls topophilia, which is a bit of a strange word, but it means love of place. And I think he was one of the earliest to really see how much that mattered. Mm-hmm. And when you read that book 10 years ago when it first came out, you're like, I don't really understand how this works. But now in a post-pandemic environment, you're starting to see that happen more and more. And I think it's going to become something that 10 years from now we're talking about as sort of a core attribute of the places that are winning.
Yeah, I would say that's a really strong narrative here in Mississippi. And y'all probably agree with me on this, and I've got 3 kids. My oldest just graduated, and guess what? He left Mississippi for a job. And so that's very distressing to his mother, who wants to make sure she can visit her grandchildren. But I know at some point I want something to be here for him to come back to. And that does happen. We have a lot of people leave the state and then they move back. So that's a huge part of the Mississippi story as well. He's in Huntsville, thankfully. It's not far away, so we can still visit on that. But tell us a little bit what's like, because you mentioned Seattle wasn't originally a startup, which, I was just thinking, thank goodness they were in a cool place, right? Because that could have really turned out bad if they lived someplace that was a real dump. Sandal's pretty nice. But tell us a little bit what's like building a startup community in a non-tech place. Did y'all face any headwinds when you're doing it? Because people don't think that technically you're technically a tech place. So,
we're trying to turn Green Bay into the new Bay Area.
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
I do say, one of the big things though is we don't want to just be another Silicon Valley. We don't want to try and be something that we're not.
Right.
And so really looking at the roots of what makes our place unique. What are the strengths that we have, and how do we build on top of that? And some of those strengths are the same here in Mississippi that I've seen. You have hardworking people. They're willing to put in the extra hour, put in the sweat equity for their companies, willing to go the extra mile. They may not have the technical skills to build the product, but that's an easier problem to solve than getting people to work harder. And so with that DNA already there, in Green Bay, and I think in this community as well, we've had some challenges on finding the right skills, but not talent. We have lots of talent, so just being able to tap into those areas in the right way, I think has been key.
So the frontier for innovation is shifting. Anybody who is in the consumer, so if you think about the consumer technology space, so the companies we think of in tech when we sort of default to tech is Facebook, Amazon, Google, all the things that you access on your phone and on the internet every day.
Microsoft,
yes. Majorly Microsoft. Those are established companies, right? How much did Microsoft do in revenue last year?
$50 billion last quarter.
Those are big companies. That's a big industry. The frontier of where startups are innovating today is changing because consumer technology is becoming more of an established market. That benefits places that have unique expertise in particular areas outside of consumer tech, right? So we in Louisiana and in New Orleans talk a lot about industrial technology. We talk about climate tech. We talk about culture tech. We talk about health. These are more complex spaces that require a slightly different innovation model, but that the coasts, so we'll pick on the coast, don't necessarily have a monopoly on, right? And so if we can bring our innovation ecosystems to be closer to those problems, we can create real opportunity.
Yeah, I've lost count now of how many times I've heard the story of Silicon Valley entrepreneur comes to the Midwest with some technology that's going to change manufacturing, and it's their first time stepping inside of an actual manufacturing facility. And they don't know how to actually disrupt or improve those processes. And now we've been able to see companies in our own region build in those ways, work with those manufacturing companies from day one, and truly understand empathize with the problems rather than just purely coming at it from a tech lens. So I think it's important to lean in on those industries.
Hannah Walker and Anna Barker, are y'all in the audience today from Glow? Okay, they left early. Anyway, they started a company called Glow, and it came out of at Mississippi State University Center for Entrepreneurship, a product that Hagen had developed, a little ice cube that you could drop in water and it glows. And then he got a letter, an email from a mom who had an autistic child and said, it brings comfort to my child. So they started creating that. Now they have a contract with Sesame Street. They decided to build their company right down the street from Mississippi State University in downtown Starkville. They could have moved anywhere. They looked at Birmingham, Chattanooga, and Atlanta, but they started to stay here. How important it is to have an anchor like that? Why universities and things like that? Does that really help when you're doing a startup to have that kind of a place, a cradle for you to be able to develop and start, to have that expertise?
Yeah, so every community is going to have its unique assets and its anchors, right?
Yeah.
So we think about all of the stakeholders to the startup community. Universities are a big one. Where do the flows of talent come from? They come from universities. Large companies that buy things, that can invest in startups, that have access to interesting problems can be a major stakeholder. The capital providers, the folks that understand how to invest in those industries. Those are all sort of key assets that can help and support the growth, and also that the community can be built around.
Yeah, in Wisconsin, we have a strong partnership with the University of Wisconsin system. And the state system's unique in that we have 14 campuses that are all tied together with Madison at the center. But through those partnerships and the ability to lean in on the university has been key, because the startups we work with employ over 50 University of Wisconsin graduates. They've been able to get over $8 million of federal funded research in partnership with the startups. All these things that just wouldn't be possible without true partnership at the highest levels of the university, trickling down to undergraduate interns and everything in between.
Yeah, I want to mention also Ole Miss Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship too. But at the end, because Oxford is becoming a destination thanks to some of the hard work of the nice man who introduced us and said bad things about Tennessee. But I still love him anyway. But at the end of the day, it's still nice. Like, you get to walk out your door at the end of the day and you're in New Orleans, and you get to walk out at the end of the day and you're home. You're in Green Bay. You're in a cool place. And that's a big part of it too. It's a quality of life issue as well, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Like going from living in Seattle with its own issues and cost of living to then being able to actually own property in Wisconsin and have that lifestyle was major change for us, and something that we value and enjoy. And Jackson here is a great place, and we're trying to build up some of the same ecosystems. I'll shout out to JJ Townsend, our Microsoft employee that's engaging the community here, and looking to build up more in the Mississippi ecosystem, learning from what we're doing in some of these other regions, including Green Bay.
What do each of your organizations focus on when it comes to accelerating high growth companies, like ideas versus execution, people, access to interesting problems, example?
So I'll say 100% execution, right? It is a great team in a great market can build a successful business. It is harder to start with a B team than it is to start with a B idea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, ideas are worthless. One of the biggest pieces of advice I give to entrepreneurs is don't protect your idea like it's this thing that your neighbor's going to steal from you. Go and talk to everyone you know about your idea. Let them beat up on you, tell you why it's a bad idea. If you still have conviction around your idea and hopefully pivot it along the way, you're probably onto something, and you're much further along in the effort that you've already given it, and the effort that you're willing to give your idea than anyone else. And so you've got that head start. If you just keep moving, no one's going to be able to steal it from you. And chances are everyone wants to help you. They're not trying to take your idea away.
Talk about how events help focus or define your startup community.
So events are convenings, right? It's an opportunity to create those connections, to create those networks. I think one of our critical assets in New Orleans is we're a 2 degree of separation community, right? You can get access to the people that you need to take the next step, to build, to get that feedback on your idea. But we're also doing it with a collaborative mindset, which I think you sow in these events and in these types of community building opportunities. And so the ability to use the megaphone to say we're in this together is really valuable.
Definitely.
Yeah, we have a guarantee of 10 big events a year, usually on Sundays. We always strive for 12 events if the Packers make the playoffs. And it's been amazing that the uniqueness of being aligned with a football team, it's the common denominator. Like, regardless of religious affiliation, political affiliation, what your beliefs are, end of the day, we're all just cheeseheads sitting next to each other on bleachers rooting for our team. And so that's unlocked possibilities that I think we didn't believe would happen in the early days. Just being able to rally around football, bring people in, even opposing teams in, and bring those connections to our startups, to our business ecosystem on those weekends, and center on something that just cuts through all of the division and all of the arguments that we have.
That also builds a culture of who wants to win with me, right? Which is a great startup attitude.
We're in the business of building champions.
So do your events have brats and beer? That's what I need to know.
And cheese curds, yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I'm on my way. That'll be
We'll bring you beignets.
Beignets. See, powdered sugar. You had me there. So, because I always say about Mississippi, and I think this is very true, if people know you, they'll pay attention to you. I think it's a very underrated part of marketing. But here, you talked about 2 degrees of separation in New Orleans. I'd say we do 1. And if you know somebody's mama, it's maybe a half. And where do you go to church? That's the other question too. But it is a big part of what the events is a big part, obviously, of what we do. What's the role of corporate sponsors, partners, overall business in the business landscape and building a startup community?
So particularly when you think about the more complex side of innovation, right? So think about these third wave opportunities and things like industrial tech and health, right? All of those startups have to go through a larger entity that generally owns that channel. And so the interface between startups and larger corporate partners that own that channel is really critical. And we're seeing an evolution in our market with companies like Entergy and Ochsner and others that are really investing in their own innovation infrastructure. They're building teams that are helping to connect directly with those startups. They're mobilizing mentors from their business lines and from the people actually doing the work within their organizations to help give early feedback, to help build relationships with those companies. And then ultimately they're building towards putting dollars to work in startups that can solve problems for those larger corporate entities. And I really believe that's the model of the future. And sort of the days of move fast and break things and the solo entrepreneur out doing it on their own are great, and we will still have a few of those success stories. But generally, the future is going to be driven by partnerships and technology being adopted in larger environments. And so I think the corporate partners have a much bigger role to play in the coming days than they have in the recent history.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with all of that. I assume we have many regional business leaders here in the room, and it's probably preaching to the choir. But if you're not already actively working with startups, I'd challenge and encourage you to find ways to do just that. Whether that's investment directly or through funds that exist or might be getting built now with some of the new statewide funding coming in, or finding ways to engage as mentors, as engage partners there as customers looking for those startups that you can work with, and it'll open up your eyes to new things that your business might be missing. It might make your own operations more efficient or open up new markets that you didn't think about before. Or it might just hedge your bets, frankly. If you're leading an older business that has a history of success, investing in these startup ecosystems is one way to kind of dip your toes financially into hedging some of those bets and both getting exposure into what the next wave might be?
So we think a lot about the startup community as a 360 system, right? It's you see in vibrant places where there's a lot of innovation going on. People are taking different roles within the ecosystem over the course of their career, and that is not always one direction. It moves in a 360-degree direction. And so somebody who might be have access to a problem within a large corporate environment might be the best person to found the company to come back and solve that problem. And go on and sell that back to that company or someone else, right? The folks that we find in our system that near peer mentorship can be as valuable as someone who did it 40 years ago, right? The person that did it yesterday remembers that pain and knows how to solve that problem in a different way. And we see folks coming sort of 360 through that system. And so the more that we can breed that, the more that we can breed that sort of revolving door between the stakeholders in the ecosystem, between investors, its founders, corporate partners, the more vibrant the ecosystem becomes.
Yeah, and we even have a couple of startups that we're working with. One example, they work in our building in Green Bay. They moved from Venice, California to Green Bay, Wisconsin in February, so they might be crazy. But they were a spin-out from a large corporation, and they were building a marketplace within this corporation in the chemical industry. And end of the day, they couldn't move fast enough inside of the large corporation, but they also, their interests weren't aligned. If you're operating a marketplace, you want to be kind of a separate entity from anyone that's using the marketplace. And so luckily the corporate leaders saw the value in what they were building, let them spin out into their own entity. The corporation, held equity, as did the founder, so that their interests are aligned in building this new thing. And now they've grown they just closed a Series A. They have co-innovation with one of our logistics partners. They're just building and growing like crazy now.
When I met my mentor, I was in college. I had an assignment to go meet somebody that did what you wanted to do and give a speech about it. It was for speech class. At the time, there were 200 editorial cartoonists in the country, and one of them just happened to be in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I walked in unannounced and said, "I'm here." And he sat me down, and we became friends. He's 91. I still call him up whenever I need advice. There's 12 editorial cartoonists now. It's gotten a little, there aren't many of us left. But still, I mean, the thing is, and I think about my sons and when they need mentors and so forth, what's the best way to connect? If you're wanting to do a startup, you want to be part of a startup community, what's the best way to reach out and to find mentors, the people that can help guide you along the way? Because honestly, I wouldn't be sitting here right now if it weren't for mine.
I mean, one quick piece of advice I give is just ask. Chances are, if you're willing to ask for help from someone, they're probably going to say yes. And you might think that you're just one of many people coming with those asks. The reality is that's not true. And so if you're just one of a couple, they're probably willing to engage with you. And then my other big piece of advice would be look for people that can give you advice, both from where you see yourself going or becoming, and also from people that don't look like you or don't come from the same background. Both will be valuable. One, maybe trekked a path that you hope to trek, and the other took a completely different path that you're going to get value in learning from. And so talk to people that, don't just think the same as you think or came from the same roots that you came from.
Yeah, I would say be someone who listens. Right. So I think as someone who mentors, you want to see your ideas taking root somewhere. You want to see someone acting on those ideas. And so the more that the person who comes to you is expressing that and reacting to it, the more engaged you're going to be as a mentor. And so, and then long term, I think the most durable mentoring relationships are ones where the mentor is actually learning from the mentee. And that's a real opportunity for knowledge exchange and for creating that sort of 360 system, is that everyone has something to give and everyone needs something. And so if you can figure out what that thing that you can give is, that can be a great way to engage folks as well.
And Tony was talking about transactions. One of those transactions that could be happening here is finding your mentor or your future mentee.
And that's truly the power of community, is getting to know people and making those connections. Look, we've got to wrap up right now. We've got to cut it short. I just want to tell both of you it's been an inspiration getting to meet both of you and getting to hang out with you today. Thank you so much. Let's give them a huge hand. Thank you, John. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.